Hello, and welcome to the Art of Healthy Retirement. I'm very excited today about today's conversation. And to review, the Art of Healthy Retirement is born actually this year in 2023, and you'll be seeing this in 2024. And I built it on goals to support business experts who are transforming from a career into healthy retirement, or those business experts who have retired. The format is 30 minutes and is posted on my YouTube channel, Nancy Schwartz. And the interview focuses on how our guests are living or will be living their ideal retirement with health. And no interview is the same, and that's the joy of this discussion. We are disrupting the way we think about healthy retirement in real time. Each podcast will be educational in content and offer inspiration to others by showcasing the guests living life on their own. So today is an amazing conversation, and our guest today is Diana Rheault, and she has an extensive background in business consulting, having worked for a big four and a very large, dominant global pharmaceutical player. And she is currently the founder of TriFocal Advisor, which is a boutique management consulting firm specializing in strategy, execution, and people-focused consulting project. Diana is licensed by Prosci Change Management as a practitioner and is certified in EQI 2.0 emotional intelligence, as well as being an executive and leadership coach. Diana has worked on very large-scale projects and also works with companies and individuals. She's a graduate of Wellesley College, where she double majored in international relations and French, and has a graduate degree in healthcare management and policy from Columbia University. On a personal note, she is one of 7 children, and in her earlier years was a precision team figure skater, as she likes to say. Think Rockettes on ice. So Diana, welcome. I'm so excited that you're here. And Diana is really here today to talk about EQ, and it is becoming more and more popular. The vernacular is widespread now through the corporate world, as well as leaders who are really transforming their companies, but it also can be applied to the individual. So Diana, you're the expert. So tell us, why are you interested in EQ and what is it exactly?
Yes. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for having me. And it's just so exciting to talk about this subject. It's something I just find fascinating. I think you mentioned, that I'm one of 7 kids. So without going into much detail, I would say that has certainly been a factor in my interest, in my lifelong interest in people and their behavior and sort of dynamics around people. You cannot be one of 7 kids. And by the way, I'm the youngest. You cannot be one of 7 kids without sort of being interested in emotional intelligence. So I would say that was my sort of springboard. And then, it's basically just been something I've always just been very fascinated by, what drives people, how they interact with each other and such. And, obviously once I got into corporate America, it was even more fascinating. And then just as a consultant myself, I do a lot of I'm a lot of a fly on the wall kind of thing. And I do a lot of observing. And it's really been fascinating to me, this topic. I just more and more, it just kept coming down to, at the end of the day, it was really about people and understanding themselves. They're having self-awareness. And so to answer your question about, what is emotional intelligence? There are so many definitions out there. I'll tell you, the one that I really like comes from this EQI 2.0 model. But it's really about having, a set of emotional and social skills that really influence how we perceive ourselves and how we express ourselves, how we maintain social relationships, how do we cope with challenges and stress in our lives, and basically, how do we use emotional intelligence or sort of emotional information in an effective and meaningful way in our lives. And while it sounds really simple, it's so challenging, and it's not an easy thing for really anybody, I don't think. So, you know, it's really about being able to understand, first perceive and identify and understand your emotions, and then how do you manage your emotions, right? So that would be kind of my first swipe at telling you what I think emotional intelligence is.
And why, you know, now today is it really prominent and almost dominant now in conversations? Why is it important for not only our leadership capabilities, but also the day-to-day activities? And you've alluded to this a little bit in your previous answer, but if you could expand a little bit so that our audience can really understand why it's so important to get a handle on the importance of EQ.
Sure. Well, I think that everybody could agree with the next statement that I'll make, which is the only thing that's constant in our world is change, right?
Exactly.
At any point in time, and with technology and everything going on, both in corporate America and outside of corporate America, nothing really stays the same. And so when there's just so much change going on, you need to be able to adapt and be flexible. But at the end of the day, we are living in a social world. And even though some folks are socially isolated, you know, for various reasons, but for the most part, we are operating in this community of our lives, right? And so EQ, or emotional intelligence, is about building better relationships with yourself. And when you have a better relationship with yourself, a better understanding of yourself, you can make different choices and decisions. And that helps you to have, you know, build better relationships with other people. So I always like to say there's really no downside to learning more about yourself and being able to apply that in your, you know, relationships outside, you know, in the world. And the other thing is, emotional intelligence is, you know, there are so many relationships out there, right? But I would kind of say there are maybe two. There are very transactional relationships, and then there are, you know, mutually satisfying relationships. And I think the question is, you know, in some cases, not every relationship can be mutually satisfying, but how can you cultivate more of those and less of the transactional ones? And EQ helps you do that.
So how do we build that muscle, that skill set, that, you know, this sounds so fabulous what you're talking about. So let's say I want to go and find out, how can I build these skill sets? Where do I go? What do I do? What do I first start looking at?
Yeah, I mean, so as you mentioned in the intro, that I am certified in emotional intelligence, and so I'm slightly biased in the sense that I got certified in this model, which has a little bit of an alien name because it's called the EQI 2.0 model. But if you can focus less on the funny name and just on what this model really is. And so to answer your question, first of all, building emotional intelligence is like anything. It's like, you know, when you want to tone your muscles in your legs, or every day you need to do some squats of some sort, right? Or something that is, you know, exercising those muscles. And it's the same thing with emotional intelligence. And there's no, you know, one way to do it. But what I would say is I'd like to just use the competencies to just kind of give us a little bit of a framework. So the EQI 2.0 model has 5 competencies, and I'm just going to, quickly list them off because we only have 30 minutes, so I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty, but there's self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal, decision-making, and stress management. And underneath each one of these 5, there are 3 kind of subscales, and it's really just looking at, building out each one of these on a little bit of a finer detail. But at the end of the day, if you look at just even the terms that I mentioned, these 5 competencies, self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal, stress management, and decision-making, they all kind of, they're all really self-oriented. And even with the interpersonal, it's once you better know yourself, you can then interact in a more satisfying way with others, or in a more productive way with others. So this is a little bit of the model, and it's really about, as I mentioned earlier, it's really about trying to understand yourself better, taking a look at yourself. We run around so much, we're so busy, we don't have a lot of time to be like, why did I react that way? Why, or wow, I got really upset when, person A said this. Why was that? So does that help a little bit, just giving a little bit of a context?
Yes, no, this is great. I love the 5 competencies, but let's just say that I am a beginner. I'm starting out. I don't know about IQ, EQ, but I would like to start in one of these competencies. Where would you suggest, given your expertise, for me to start dipping my toe?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is that, well, first of all, there's a great book out there by Mark Brackett called Permission to Feel. And
it's a fabulous book. I just want to tell our audience, it's an incredible book. I think it came out a couple of years ago, but he's so renowned, and he's spreading this all over the world of what he's doing.
Yes.
So he's an incredible person to follow as an influencer, but also to read his materials as well. So thank you for highlighting it.
Yes, and he's the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And, his whole hypothesis is that we have not really been given the permission to feel, right? And so as a result of that, like nobody ever sat me down and said, here are all the emotions that you could possibly have, and here's how you go about, understanding them. Nobody ever taught me that, and I'm pretty sure nobody ever taught most of our audience and beyond, right? So his whole thing is we need to start observing ourselves and our feelings. And I have this, the audience I don't think can see this, but it's called the emotions wheel or the feelings wheel. And it's really just a circle of varying degrees of different emotions. And I think to start, as you mentioned, if you're a beginner, and it's like, first, just start paying attention. You don't need to pay attention to your emotions and your feelings all day long, because it might be a little bit exhausting. But check in with yourself. And there is a term that I came across in all my research called an emotional audit. And it's really just, in my opinion, kind of like a fun way to think about it. Like we do audits, right, for our corporations and things like that.
Exactly.
Why not do an emotional audit? And all that means is check in with yourself periodically throughout the day. Especially try to pay attention when things are very emotional for you and you're getting upset. That's the time that's really important to take a moment and be like, what just happened? And maybe if you can't do it at that moment, take a little time, 3 or 4 hours later and be like, what happened there? What was I feeling? And just give yourself the opportunity that you don't give yourself most of the time, and not most of us take this time to figure out how we feel. So that would be kind of I have this little phrase here that Mark has said. I took a little quote from his book, and he says, if we don't express our emotions, they pile up like a debt that will eventually come due. And
Yeah.
for me, I think about road rage, right? Like that person didn't just overnight come to be that way. They came because there have been things piling up for a long time, and one day it just popped, right?
Yeah.
So does that help?
Yes, no, I think that that's a terrific frame. And I want to add that, when I was working, I really believe that we are not aware, or at least I'll speak for myself, that
Mhm.
I was not aware that I was in really a survival mode.
Yes.
And that feelings, this wheel for me is just absolutely overwhelming, but I'm beginning to appreciate it because wow, I don't think I really had a feeling. More so, check, this goal is met, or check, this client is met, or check,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
project is done.
Mhm.
But not how do I feel about that? And that
Exactly.
was both in a global multinational, uh, as well as my own company. I was so busy doing, and I
Yes.
love this, what you're talking about, the emotional audit.
Yes.
I don't think in 60 some odd years I ever took an emotional audit. Where am I? And only now, having created Envision Healthy Retirement, oh, that's a thing. Oh, how interesting. So, and
Yes.
I don't think that I'm speaking just for my lack of feelings. I know that so many of the executives that I work for as clients
Yes.
feel the same way. And it's it, it's the emotions have been shut down.
Yes.
Why? I don't know why. But I think that all of a sudden the companies and the major leaders of thought process and culture and wellness are
Yeah.
coming forth saying, an emotional audit might be a good thing for our company.
Yes.
To take the temperature not only of the company, but the employees, and which divisions feel what and how, what's the level on your previous slide, the stress levels, like right now, there's seasonal things that are occurring. So yeah, so I really, I encourage our audience to really listen to what Diana is saying. And this is not something that you read it and then it happens. This is a process over time, or at least I'll speak for myself. I'm not the expert. We'll let Diana assess that, but that it's slowly coming forth.
Exactly. And you could even like, let's say, this is new to you and you're like, I'm kind of curious about this emotional audit. You know, you can start with something super simple, which is when you wake up in the morning, check how you feel. How do I
Yeah.
feel? Right when you wake up, right? And let's make this super easy. At lunch, check how you feel. At dinner, check how you feel. 3 times a day, very quickly, it's matching with your eating schedule. Just check how you feel, because the other thing that's going on is a little narrative that we're not necessarily aware of that's running in the back all the time, and you can quickly tap into it, and that will help you see, you know, when I did my first emotional audit, I found that this morning I'm not feeling super great. And then, you take a quick look, well, why? What's going on there? Just small little questions, very simple, not complicated, and repeated over time become a little bit of a routine and become easier. So that's a good way to start, I would say.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that simplicity to start is wonderful. Tell us about some traps. What could derail? What what could go wrong here?
Yeah. Well, there's so many things. First, I also want to just throw out a statistic that I came across. in preparing for this podcast, which is that there was a little research study done. Well, I shouldn't say little. It was a 5-year research study that was done by an organizational psychologist. And what they found was 95% of people think they're self-aware, but only 10 to 15% actually are. So I think those are just interesting statistics to kind of show as proof that the more you do this, the more you start paying attention, the more you can become self-aware. And it's not, self-awareness is not like, maybe some people are born with it a little bit more than others, but it can all be learned, and it's just a muscle that you flex.
Right. So it's building that muscle, and everybody has to start from somewhere. And most of us have to start from ground zero.
Yes.
And slowly through a process like yourself of checking in,
Yes.
Can build a database of how we are feeling over time. And I think that the time piece is very important. How are we, and what is happening within our day-to-day scope?
Yes. And to answer your question about traps, I just want to throw in real quickly before we get there, which is just the other thing that's useful to think about. And I mentioned this before, that, let's say you find yourself, wanting to raise your voice, or you're starting to feel very tense in a situation. That's when it's really good to kind of be like, just noticing yourself, noticing, hey, what's going on, And what I would say is, a lot of times this is the result of emotional triggers, that we get triggered. We get triggered by people and situations. And so what I would say is that it's really just about paying attention and noticing, oh, wow, all of a sudden, like my shoulders are tense, I'm feeling, my neck is kind of getting tense, and I feel like, and some people more so than others, but can feel their heartbeat. So sometimes you can be like, wow, my heart is kind of racing all of a sudden. That's, those are great signs that you need to do that emotional audit, because your body is telling you something, that something is disturbing you in some way. So I want to just put a plug there for emotional triggers, that people just try to pay attention, because a lot of these things have their roots in negative experiences and perhaps like traumatic events that occurred in your past, and you're getting triggered by it.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, Diana, and that we're learning by science, and you're quoting all these studies, which I love. Really that the interconnection between the mind and the body are really one, and this is what we're learning. So to be able to utilize the science, which you're bringing forth here about emotional triggers and many other things, is only for our benefit.
It definitely is. And, our emotions do affect our health ultimately,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So the other thing is, and this, I wanted to just mention, because this is a little bit of keeping with this question that you had asked, like, hey, if I'm new to all of this, how do I get emotional intelligence? And we talked a little bit about the emotional audits. So again, this I'm taking from Mark Brackett, his Permission to Feel. He has something called the ruler framework. And again, this doesn't have to be like a very complicated way, but for you to start, as I mentioned, start noticing things that are going on in your body. And, so R stands for recognizing the occurrence of an emotion. So just, as simple as, oh, I feel a little bit mad after they said that, trying, and then you is understanding. So why am I feeling angry or mad? That something just occurred. Labeling it. It's useful for us to try to understand what exactly we're feeling. So I'm mad, or I feel disrespected, whatever it might be, but just trying to put a label to that so you can understand what's going on. And then, you know, sometimes it just depends on the context, but sometimes you may need to express how you feel, or, you know, or acknowledge how you feel. Sometimes it might just be to yourself, or sometimes it might be, let's say, in a room, you know, where something happened and you need to react and let people know, like, look, I really didn't appreciate that people cut me off when I was trying to explain my perspective, or whatever. And then the last one is R for regulating. So this is the part about, hey, now that I know that something is going on and I'm feeling this, and I figured out how I'm feeling, and I figured out sort of why, then we have information to make a decision about how we want to behave, right? And so that's the whole point about monitoring and, you know, regulating our emotions. So that's just like a helpful little framework that you guys can use. Again, you don't have to sit there and be like, oh, what was you, you know, what did she say about L, you know, but it's just understanding and trying to dissect like what happened in that moment that has caused you to feel a certain way. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, I love this Mark Brackett ruler, and he's rolled this out. Don't think Diana's just putting it on a slide and giving it to us. You know, this is globally rolled out, highly successful in schools, universities, institutions. I mean, this is a great framework to apply to oneself.
Yes, definitely. And then you know, you asked me a little bit about pitfalls.
Mm.
And I, you know, just in the interest of time, we don't have time to go through them in, you know, great detail. But what I want to mention is a couple of things. One is that we're really only conscious of 5% of our cognitive function. And that 95% that's going on is literally just to keep us alive. And it would be impossible for us to be completely aware of that 95%, because it would have to be for us to be like, oh, gee, like, have my cells divided? You know, like, you know, is my kidney operating properly? And, you know, all of these things, is my heart beating properly? All of these things that our body just does, because it's a pretty amazing thing. And so, you know, there's only a small percentage that we're aware of. But with all of that said, you know, we do have some limitations and in our perceptions, and what I call little pitfalls. And one of the things is that, and this is pretty powerful, but that, and this comes from the book called Know Thyself, The New Science of Self-Awareness, from Stephen Fleming. And he talks about how humans generate beliefs first, and then we find evidence to support those beliefs. So it's really important to understand that, which is why you want to really work on your self-awareness, because you might have limiting beliefs that are holding you back, that you're not aware of, because your mind is just doing what it's meant to do, which is generate the beliefs first and find evidence to support those beliefs. So let's just give a small example that you think you are not talented for a certain thing. And so your belief is that you're not talented and therefore you can't go do it. And then what you're doing, unbeknownst to you, but you're going around finding examples all the time that basically support the fact that of this belief that you are not talented. So, and if you're not self-aware, you can't interrupt that. So, you know, I myself started to find myself feeling like I sometimes can have a negative mindset. Well, it wasn't until I really started paying attention that I thought, whoa, you know, sometimes I caught myself in the middle of thinking a limiting belief, and it was shocking to me. And I thought, oh my God, I've been walking around doing this and I had no idea I was doing it. So, but because I was really working on trying to be more self-aware, I was kind of like, there you are again. Like, and here's the other thing I want to throw in. I feel like this can be fun. It actually doesn't have to be dark and somber, like, okay, so yes, maybe you have this thought that you're not talented a certain way, and that is unfortunate. However, when you start paying attention to it, you could say to yourself, oh, there you are again, you little sneaky thing. Like, oh, I'm not going to let you get away with that. I am talented, and I am going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And you can kind of reframe your negative, your negative limitation, your negative self-belief, whatever you want to call it. Does that make sense, Nancy?
Absolutely. I'm a huge believer in this, and I'm actually learning this right now. And you and I have discussed this. And the beliefs can be so powerful in supporting a human growth, a leader's growth, and they can be absolutely devastating,
Yes.
and cruel and ugly and all the most horrible things you want to say. And we as humans are known to be incredibly cruel to ourselves.
Yeah.
And really what you're saying here, and I'm going to stretch this a little bit into my belief system, that, we need to, as you say, reframe this, because this is absolutely shutting down our path forward. And if we can recognize and excavate, and I've had a similar journey to Diana on other things, and I'm like, wow, I've been walking around with this for how long now?
Yes.
Okay, Nancy, if you want to get moving, you gotta let's get moving to get moving, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I love this. So it's just, as you say, the self-perception, listening, and then, Diana talked about, 5% conscious. So we have this extraordinary mind-body connection that's running, is an operating system, basically, if you think about it from a business point of view, running all these things. So we only have really capacity for 5%, but I know Diana and I've talked about this. I think that it's even higher, that our subconscious is really running. In other words, the back office, the operating system is running more than our conscious. So even more so to emphasize the discovery process. And like you said, I'm not sure it's fun. I don't know if I could stretch there for myself, but I could be inquisitive. I could be curious. I would want to be an explorer to discover how I can better myself. So, I really appreciate that you brought this to our attention, because I think it's so needed. And I'm not sure, how would I have turned out? How would you have turned out if we were presented this, say, 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
Oh,
right?
For sure. I
Yeah.
know. And I
So
think, sorry, go on.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I just think about, and I'll get personal just for 1 second, but my father was an alcoholic, and he, I think about this stuff with regard to him, because I know that he had a lot of struggles in his life. And if he had only been able to, tap into some of these things, I think, he eventually, by the way, did recover from his alcoholism, but in terms of, stopping his drinking and things like that. But, he could have benefited so much from this type of work, I think. And so, it can be helpful to anybody in any scenario under any circumstances. And my other point, this little plug that I wanted to put about the fun part is, I understand, we're not talking about sort of real trauma when we're, there are things where sometimes it's best to go talk with somebody, like a psychologist or therapist or whatever, when things are really deep and scary. But for things that don't fall into that realm, what I would say is, lightening up our a fear of just looking under the hood, and what I was trying to say about the humor is that when we do start to pay attention more often, we can see kind of almost the beauty of our robotic thinking. And that's when we can kind of start over time laughing at ourselves. There you go again, Diana, like thinking, X, Y, and Z, like I gotcha, and it doesn't have to be, it could be this thing where you're not shaming yourself, but more compassion for yourself and almost a little like joking, like, oh, there, I did it again, need to work on that one. You know what I mean?
No, I appreciate that. And I think that it's a process of listening to yourself and the
Yes,
subconscious. So
absolutely.
we have a few more minutes, Diana.
Yep.
You and I could talk about this for eternity
I
because we love
know.
it. We're
I
passionate
know.
about it.
I
But
know.
tell us some top tips. What are some things that you could leave the audience with? Potentially they are beginners, or maybe they're experts, but they're really wanting to become in tune with themselves.
Well, in terms of, so the tips that I would say would be to, as I mentioned, kind of doing this emotional audit. Very simple, 3 times a day, just a quick check-in.
Diana,
And
could I just interrupt you, and can you come back to your full screen?
oh, yes,
Because I want
sure.
to be able to see you. Yes,
Okay.
perfect.
So the emotional audit, as I said, kind of very simply, like, let's just throw it out there. And if you're really overwhelmed by the whole thing, just do it when you wake up in the morning,
Mhm.
or and when you go to bed at night, right? Because that usually have 2 seconds before you go to sleep, where you can be like, how did I feel today? Like, how did today go for me? The other thing that these are kind of what I'm just throwing out as little pearls of EQ wisdom, but I want to just, it goes back to this thing where I said that 95%, that statistic, 95% of people think they're self-aware, but only 10 to 15% actually are, right? So what I would just say here is that your behavior affects other people, and your behavior has consequences, right? So when we're trying to be really self-aware, more self-aware, let's put it that way, because I don't know that anybody can ever be perfectly self-aware, right? We're all human. But that, it's important for you to understand yourself, and that way you can use that information in a way for you to build better relationships, both with yourself and as well as with other people. So I think it's just really important, because that's one thing I always find, that people don't seem to realize that they've acted a certain way and then they leave something, but the consequences are still there, affecting other people, this, that, and the other thing. So I think that's really important. The other thing I want to mention, and this sounds so simple and silly, but I think it's so important, which is the tone in which you choose to speak to people. That you can deliver a message, sometimes not even, an easy message, but if it's delivered in a tone that is not causing distress to others, you could actually get your point across. So I think that's really important. The other thing I would say, we didn't get to go into great detail around rigid thinking, but some pitfalls, are around just thinking that we're mind reading, or believing that we're stating and observing the truth, but actually we're mind reading, and we don't really know how other people are thinking about something. We're just assuming that we do. So that rigid thinking is really important for you to be aware of. That, let's say you have a scenario, something has happened, you're upset about it, and you're like, I just know that person did this because of X, Y, and Z. Well, you could also throw in, well, maybe they did it. I don't know. I don't know exactly, right? And have this sort of openness to that you might be wrong in your interpretation. And that would be okay. The other thing is that admitting when we're wrong and apologizing. I'm not saying that you're always wrong and that you should always go around admitting that you're wrong and apologizing to everybody, but if you know that you have maybe did something that wasn't quite right, just own up to it and say you're sorry. And you know what? You will not waste so much time. So I like to, and also I'm not saying that you need to apologize and admit you're wrong, like when you legitimately were not. But if you think you were, it's not going to cause any harm for you to just be like, you know what, I kind of goofed and I'm really sorry and I didn't mean to offend you, and move on, and then complimenting others. So I would say when somebody does something good and you are impressed by it, take a second and let them know. It really does help. And it spreads good, kind of goodwill. You win and the other person wins. So there's really no downside to it.
Yeah, no, I love that complimenting each other. And so we're running out of time, Diana.
Yes.
And I love all the tips that you're giving, but I love ending on complimenting, because that is a connection to another human. Rarely do we take the time, even if it's something small. You could be in the post office or on the street or on the Metro North, or
Yes.
subway, or traveling around the world, backpacking, wherever you are. And I think that sharing of that human connection through complimenting is such a lost art. And I think bringing that back to the forefront is really a way of living. So I want to thank you so much for all your incredible advice and suggestions and education and process that you've mapped out. Where, if someone from the audience would like to contact you, and how do they go about that? What's the best method?
Sure. I would say you can catch me on LinkedIn. It's Diana Rheault, and it's Rheault, which is a bit of a long last name. But you can contact me on LinkedIn. You could also email me, diana@TriFocalAdvisor.com. I'm more than happy to, discuss this more with you. And then I guess my parting words would just be, don't be afraid of your emotions. They're your teachers. They contain great information, and you may be amazed at what you find out. And only when you have the information can you actually do something about it, right? But if we don't try to get the information, we can't really do much about it.
So thank you, Diana. And I'm so excited that you've graced our podcast. And
Thank
so
you so much
I'm
for having
Nancy.
me.
Absolutely. I'm Nancy Schwartz from the Art of Healthy Retirement. Have a fabulous week. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.